Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. As the government uses exclusion orders to ban so-called hate preachers from the country, we ask, is the banning of Muslim speakers from university campuses justified? Universities are traditionally seen as bastions of free speech. But is that reputation under threat as increasing numbers of speakers have been banned in recent years? Or are the bans a necessary security precaution? With me to discuss the issues are Ibrahim, spokesperson for the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, Ashgar Bukhari, spokesperson for the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK, and on the phone we're joined by Dr. Julian, the co-founder of the Centre for Security and Intelligence Studies at the University of Buckingham. Welcome to the programme. Ibrahim, in your view, what's actually going on in the universities at the moment? Is there a trend to increasing numbers of bans?
Yes, there's a very dangerous concern that we have as an organisation where you're having a case where the Muslim speakers in particular are being targeted and actually treated in a different way as opposed to other speakers that are invited onto the university campus. And what we've always called for is that there should be a uniform speaker policy, which has actually been designed and exists by the National Union of Students, which has steps of dealing with different types of speakers who may have said things outside on campus or on campus. And what we're calling for is that to be applied. But the problem we have is that universities are taking their own discretion and are maybe essentially relying on, false, accounts or false evidence that's been submitted to them and saying that, well, the speakers might not be conducive to our values, so we shouldn't have them on campus. And it sets a really dangerous precedent. And it's something we should never have in this country. And it's quite concerning, to be honest.
Do you think this is a trend that has been mounting over recent years?
No doubt. I mean, this is, Muslims will know this is across society, and obviously universities now are reflecting that. Traditionally, as you say, there have been bastions of free speech, and in fact, the kind of the civil rights movement, the Black civil rights movement, really was kind of taken up by young students. Now, those very leaders, if they were Muslim today, would be considered radical or extremists or hate preachers, just for arguing for their own civil rights, for their own justice, and for their liberty of their people anywhere on this earth. So there's no doubt that the Muslims are targeted more, they are vilified more, and they are living in a state of fear.
Dr. Richards, so let me bring you into the discussion. Do you think that perhaps the security argument is now being misapplied in cases where there is no real danger to national security?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I think there is a risk that we feel that either there isn't a security issue here or that if there was one, it's gone away. I think neither of those things are true, and we do have to take threats seriously. I mean, there is a question about this pathway to radicalism thesis that this is all to do with, that if young people hear extremely radical sermons or speeches that might set them on a pathway towards violent extremism. We don't know the truth of that, but that will be at the bottom of this, and it would be foolish to think that there is no problem in that area or that there's nothing to worry about. So no.
So, Ibrahim, do you think this is the case that let's grant the argument that there are a tiny number of people who are drawn towards this. Does banning speakers wholesale, does that address it, do you think?
Well, I actually need to discredit this individual. I mean, I think it's rubbish, really, to be honest. I mean, the fact is, there are so many studies and reports that actually say that there is no one way or pathway to extremism, and there's no evidence so far that no one's produced that says that there is systematic cases of radicalisation or extremism on campus. The issue here is issue of taste and decency. Some people may perceive a speaker who has an opinion on something on topic that's quite close to his or her heart, and that speaker may articulate that point, and people may not feel happy with that, whether it be issues regarding Islamic law or Sharia or other areas. And what we're trying to say is that universities should be protected. There should be places where people should be allowed to discuss and articulate debates, and that's where you have a safe and controlled environment on campus. And it's a great institution in our country. That this country is actually fantastic in protecting civil liberties, or was, should I say, in the past. And it's really, again, striking that Dr. Richards will actually bring this point out of extremism and radicalisation. There is no proof. If you actually look at the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, they've actually said there's no evidence of systematic radicalisation. And even the MI5's own report has said as well, there's no one way of radicalisation or extremism on campus. So again, it's much discredited, and it's rubbish, to be honest. That's what I think.
Dr. Richards, let me bring you straight back in on that. Do you actually have an example where there's a proven link between a campus speaker and somebody becoming a terrorist?
Well, there's quite a lot of research in the academic realm into how people get radicalised, and the pathway to radicalisation thesis is a well-studied and well-researched thesis in which...
Much discredited, I'm afraid.
Sorry?
It's a much discredited thesis in many eyes.
Well, in some eyes it may be, yes, but there's quite a lot of research has gone into it. So, of course, these are extraordinarily complex issues. And if I could just come back on one other point that was made. I mean, it was suggested that Islamic speakers should be allowed to express their opinions and so on. Of course they should. The problem is where opinions become hateful or insightful, and that's been the problem, really. Those are the sorts of things that are causing the university authorities to consider banning or blocking certain speakers.
These are two different categories, though, aren't they? I mean, people may dislike the content of a speech, may find it hateful, but that's not the same as actually encouraging or a proven link between that and a violent or any illegal act.
And there's the problem. This kind of so-called research is really an underbelly of Islamophobic narrative. It argues that when the Muslims argue about issues that are very dear to their heart, and that they are difficult topics to talk about. This war of terror, and governments are fighting this so-called war of terror on the Muslims, and they're upset about it, and they want to express their views, however how uncomfortable those views are. And by arguing these kind of generalized war of terror propaganda words like radicalization, whatever that means, hate preacher, whatever that means, Islamist, whatever that means, these kind of terminology, what it does is it allows them to say that anything this person says that we don't like, well, it's going to lead him to become a radical or an extremist, and therefore that radical or extremist will perhaps go and blow himself up. So it's the thin end of a wedge where, in short, it's their way through the back door of banning any opposition to their war of terror and allowing the Muslims to come back and argue their case about the barbarity of this kind of attack against the Muslim community.
I mean, Dr. Richards, do you think that the bar of proof would be too high to require in these cases that somebody could actually produce evidence of somebody who committed a terrorist act or been convicted of a terrorist act or an illegal act of any kind, who would actually have to say, I went to so-and-so's lecture, they said this inspired me to do that? That would be the normal criteria, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, and of course that would be extraordinarily difficult to prove, wouldn't it? I mean, how, and has been difficult to prove, how somebody ends up committing a violent terrorist act, the various influences on them that led them to that point.
But isn't the problem that unless you can provide that kind of proof, it is simply an unproven accusation? You say so-and-so said this has led to this, I don't actually have any proof of the connection between the two?
Is it not placing our heads in the sand somewhat to suggest that there is no link between extreme radical speeches and the radicalisation of certain individuals?
Okay, gentlemen.
Let me be very clear. We have a series of legislations in this country that actually protect against incitement to hatred, incitement of violence, and so on. And there's so many. We've had one as recently as 2006, and no one up to this day has actually brought a case against a speaker or an individual who said something which has actually led someone to do something. It's absolutely absurd. And I actually would say to Dr. Richards, if you do have a case, please pop down to your local police station and ask them very nicely, I'd like to report so-and-so, because you can't. And that's the issue. The issue is that we have people who are trying to bring these discredited theories and trying to link something that is so obscure with something that's so obscure on that side and bring them together and say they're the same. Hate speech is again not well defined. It's not very clear what it really means. But at the same time, yes, there is, and like I said, there is a general, legitimacy that people are concerned with regard to speakers on campus. And we said that there are policies in place. The National Union of Students have actually produced fantastic guidelines based on the law, based on what the local the government department of Business Skills and Innovation have actually said on the issue. So I'd suggest that he really looks into that.
And if he's really concerned about extremism leading to terrorism, why doesn't he go to something that's very concrete, that every Muslim could tell him that if you want to stop extremism or terrorism occurring within the UK, then stop your foreign policy murdering, denying the freedom of billions of Muslims right around the world. Now, the fact is that there's people on campus who would argue for the war of terror. Well, they are creating the link to terrorism. It's not the people who are opposing it. So if you want want to lock people up or ban them, ban some of the people that must be supporting his narrative and not ours.
I mean, Dr. Richards, do you feel that in any way there is a kind of singling out of the Muslim community here? I mean, when people, not just in the Muslim community, but across communities, see, say, Nick Griffin of the BNP being invited to speak at Oxford or Cambridge, they can't but feel that something different rule is being applied here.
Answer to your question, no. I don't think any particular community is being singled out. I think anyone who espouses hateful and insightful comments at university is liable to get themselves banned, and Nick Griffin would be in the same boat as much as anyone else. So no, and I think, if we're talking about evidence, let's have some evidence that the university authorities are systematically discriminating against Muslim speakers. I haven't seen any evidence of such discussions and planning taking place. Let's have some of that, perhaps.
But you're acting without evidence on the other stuff, but you're not willing to do any action to protect the Muslims on the...
Obviously.
Well, let me give you a case study. I mean, for example, you have a university. Let's say it's 30,000 students attend that university, and you have maybe 60 societies on that campus. And you may have the Palestinian Society, the Arab Society, or even the Islamic Society on campus, out of those 60. And they may invite speakers like the others do, like the Jewish Society, like the Christian Union, and so on and so forth. And what you'll find, which is, again, very, there's no need for a centre of academic study on this issue. It's very clear that when a Palestinian Society or an Arab Society or an Islamic Society invites a speaker, they're more likely to be restricted, more likely to be banned, more likely to be excluded from university as opposed to somebody from the Jewish Society or from the Christian Union. And the issue you have really here is that, is it really being applied fairly? Is it really being applied in a genuine way that actually looks at the spirit of the law and what the spirit of the guidelines that are produced by the National University students and by others that actually understand the area better? And what I would say that if you actually look at the average student, I mean, if you take the case of Cambridge Union, for example, who recently invited Marie Le Pen to speak at their union. Now, no one in their right mind, except for fascists, in my opinion, will actually say that that person is actually of benefit speaking on campus because she's spreading hate. But at the end of the day, it is their right to invite that speaker. And the speaker, as far as I'm aware, hasn't broken any laws in this country or in France. So the issue is here is an issue of taste and decency. And what we're saying is that university should be a place of discussion, of vibrancy, of passionate debate. And that's what actually makes the university experience more enhanced and more enlightening for many.
I mean, that's good. What do you think? I mean, let's try and get inside this question a little bit, because it often seems to me that the way in which these questions are addressed is that if a particular speaker arrives in a ISOC meeting, for instance, they say something controversial, as if this is all sort of automatically transmitted into the minds of the entire audience without debate or discussion. But that surely isn't what happens.
And there you have it. That's the narrative that's being fed. The narrative that's out there within the press and obviously parroted by individuals on this programme here is that the Muslims are so barbaric, so extreme, so prone to violence and to radical thinking that all it takes is someone to come on and say something and they're just going to walk out that university and start blowing themselves up. This is a racist way of thinking. This is a Nazi-like demonization, segmenting, polarizing the community to make them think that we are other, irrational human beings, that no one within that ISOC is going to say, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense. I'll challenge that speaker. I'll now form a broader, different opinion, whereas every other community is given that grace, as this chap here just said, that Cambridge University with allowing Le Pen in. No one thought that young white non-Muslim guys are going to go out now and start shooting Pakistanis. But when it comes to the Muslim community, we are so barbaric, so devil-like that's all it takes is a hate preacher to come in and off we go.
I mean, Dr. Richards, let me just put this to you. Isn't there an assumption here that there is a direct connection between what is said and the actions of the audience, whereas we all know that kind of direct link simply doesn't exist?
Well, I don't know that it doesn't exist, and can I just correct the previous speaker? I don't think I've ever said Muslims or anyone else are barbaric. That's ridiculous.
You called us radical, and that type of language
Ashgar,
itself
just let Dr. Richards finish his point, and then we'll come back to you. Dr. Richards, continue.
Clearly, it's not a black and white case of if somebody says something hateful and insightful that anybody immediately goes out and commits a a criminal act. Clearly, that's not the case. But I think there are, degrees of trust and decorum here. That if, and I should say that the university authorities will, where they do take these decisions to ban particular speakers or societies, even they don't take those decisions lightly, because they know all sorts of wrath and controversy will be brought down on their heads. So they do weigh these decisions up very, very carefully. And I think it's a question of, if a particular group starts to develop a history of quite often inviting hateful and insightful speakers,
there we have it again,
then they maybe block their copybook.
Ibrahim, just let him finish and we'll bring you back.
University authorities to decide that they have to treat that particular society in a different way.
So, Dr. Richard, do you subscribe to the view that there's a kind of conveyor belt that starts with this and ends with terrorism in some manner?
Well, for a very, very small number of individuals, I think that is a plausible theory, and there's quite a lot of research, academic research, that's gone into that. But I agree. We're talking a tiny percentage of individuals, and that's part of the rationale here. But the other large part is just a question of basic decency and freedom of speech, and freedom of individuals not to be vilified or spoken about in a hateful and insightful way.
Okay, Ibrahim, you can respond to those points, of course, but in a larger context, it would seem that there's a kind of argument here that we're encountering again and again, that a particular group of people all act in a uniform way, but at the same time, everybody has to grant that these actions, insofar as they exist, are the actions of an extraordinarily tiny minority. So the causal connection doesn't seem to be made.
Well, this is the thing, and I mean, from everything I've heard, so far, I mean, I've drawn one conclusion that Dr. Richards himself is quite, a discredited individual in the sense, the way he understands the issue. The issue really here is that you have a case of the majority, if not all young Muslims who are at university today. Most of them come from a black or minority ethnic background. Most of them come from first-generation Muslims whose parents may not have been born and brought up in the UK, and are trying to get on and do the right thing, trying to work hard, get education, marry, have children, and actually, be a part of ordinary British life. And the issue is that they go to campus day in, day out, and they're being battered away, and they're being chipped away because they're being told that you're not intelligent enough to understand arguments. You're not bright enough to understand what's right and wrong. And this sort of childish, and with all due respect, it's an absolute schoolboy theory to come along and say, well, because someone says something very, very controversial, he will adopt it immediately. It's absolutely nuts, if you ask me. And the issue really here is that the issue I have with the speaker in particular is that where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? It's becoming some sort of thought crime. Essentially, people are not allowed to think a thing or say a thing because it may not be agreed with the majority of society, and that's really dangerous. If you look at the Education Act, for example, it says it right there in black and white that freedom of speech should be catered for on campus as much as possible for visitors, for students, and for staff, and that's what we should be protecting the great and rich cultural heritage we have in this country, where people can articulate things and discuss and debate and have and enjoy their experience. And again, my personal opinion of today's, what we've heard today is that it's this sort of pre-Enlightenment thinking where we can't say things because it's wrong and it's wrong and it's bad and it's naughty. But we can't say why it's wrong and bad and naughty. People differ, people disagree. That's life, and we should have that in an open and arena as opposed to something closed and back door.
Ashgar, are you aware of particular cases where this has been made? Because this seems to me to be the crux of it. I mean, we might be having a kind of more balanced debate if those people that say that there's a problem here could say, look, so and so, Richard Reeder or the shoe bomber or whatever, attended this lecture. This lecturer said this, he did that. I mean, even if the causal connection couldn't be proven, there might be at least a case to investigate or answer there. Are you aware of such cases?
I'm not, but it's such a poor argument, because what they will say is, look, Muslims, any Muslim will go to a mosque at some point, right? They will go to an ISOC or a lecture at one point. And if anyone was to simply say, well, they went there, therefore they did it because of that, how ludicrous would that be? That's like saying, well, I went to Tesco's, well, that's why I did it. It's an ignorant way of thinking. In fact, it is no different from the way they used to treat black people, by saying that you are too, you're like a savage, and everything they spoke about were savage, ignorant people who couldn't understand intellectual discourse, and they had to be taught how to do it, and laws need to be brought up to make sure that these savages weren't doing anything wrong. Well, we're the new savages, the Muslims are. But if I could just move the debate to just ask, we know this is happening. The Muslims know, whether the doctor believes it or not, the Muslims know. And why are the Muslims, why have they allowed themselves to be so disorganized, so passive in the face of this type of oppression that is increasing every single day, and allowed no action to be taken to stop this happening? Why have they remained so passive in the face of so much demonization, whether it's at university, whether it's in the halls, the corridors of power, or whether it's in the streets of Britain? We have to start to change the way we think.
Okay. Dr. Richards, do you have, I mean, I'm sorry to push you on this, but it seems to me an important part of the discussion to ask, are you aware of particular cases where this person who has ended up planting a bomb or planning to plant a bomb has been to this particular lecture, and this lecturer said something which might have incited him to do this? Because if people could come up with a few cases here, the argument might be a little bit more kind of convincing.
Yeah. I don't think there are any cases where, you know, attendance at a particular lecture or speech has caused somebody to, has definitively been shown to cause somebody to commit a terrorist act. But of course that would be very, very difficult to prove. But I would turn it around the other way and say we do have a problem of violent extremism in this country. I mean, sure, it's a very small percentage of people who are involved in it, and they're involved in several different strands of it, whether it's on the far right or in Islamist circles or any number of other terrorist circles. We do have to try and work out how such people end up becoming violent extremists, and there is, like it or not, there is a process of radicalisation for such people that moves them along a particular pathway, and we have to tackle that. We have to confront it. We can't just pretend that it's not there and it's fantasy. It is there.
You don't need to pretend. All you have to do is look at the evidence that is out there that says all the people that have failed to commit their terrorist attacks, once attempting to, all of them being interviewed, said the root reason for why they took up that action was the oppression, murder, enslavement, denial of freedom of millions and millions of Muslims right around the world. So don't pretend it's some so-called hate preacher. You want to look at hate preachers, look at your newspapers. But the actual reason for anyone taking up action is the denial of Muslim freedom, the murder of the Muslim brethren around the world. And it doesn't take a rocket science to do that. So if you're interested in stopping this, stop killing people abroad. It's not rocket science. Just get on with the job.
I mean, it is an amazing kind of double standard. I mean, there are army recruitment officers in the colleges and indeed in schools very often. You wouldn't hear the argument that somebody who commits a war crime when they're a soldier, that this was because they were taught something by an army recruitment person. I mean, and that's the kind of logic that's being run here.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's skill by association. I mean, because you might have been somewhere or spoken something, then surely you must agree with that person. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, when I was at university, when I'm at university, I deal with, different people on campus, colleagues from the left or from the right, or colleagues might not be politically affiliated. And if I was, to have been dealt with all sides, I mean, I'm like, what? Am I confused? Am I a left winger? Am I a right winger? It doesn't really matter. What matters is that people are engaging and people are connecting, and that's what really counts. And what we need to have is that this issue is that Muslims are not being normalised. Islam is not normalised on campus. And if you actually look at what is Muslim students do on campus, and I'll tell you the facts of what they do on campus. I mean, they raise £500,000 in charity every year. They work in all kinds of voluntary sector organisations. They actually promote issues that are close to their heart, like Palestine. So this is what Muslims are doing.
I have to stop you both there, I'm afraid, gentlemen, because we're coming to the end of the programme. Thank you both for contributing so volubly to that, and do join us in the second half of the programme, where we'll be discussing the withdrawal of legal aid to many claimants under the government's policy. So thank you very much to my studio guest and to Dr. Julian Richards for joining us in the first half of the Politics and Media programme.